Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. With India's bank NPAs in the range of 10 lakh crores and they continuing to rise, because of that, India today is littered with bankrupt, closed and fraudulent entities. They are awaiting either an auction or a takeover or a merger or finally a liquidation. For those who have the money, for those who have the appetite, it's a great time to pick up entities and assets for a pittance. But surprisingly, it's not been happening despite companies being available for a song. Except for a few cases in the inception, which was the case of Bhushan Steel being taken over by Tata Steel, Bhushan Power being taken over by JSW, SR Steel being taken over by ArcelorMittal. Except for these kind of few cases, no cases have really taken off in terms of acquisitions or purchase as were expected. And these cases happen only because their assets and businesses could be easily identified with those of the acquiring companies, and that's why the mergers and takeovers could happen. Because takeovers are not happening, because these kind of acquisitions are not happening, there are thousands of companies which are mired in NPAs, which are closed because of want of funds or frauds by the promoters, and which should be acquired. They are not getting acquired. Ideally, any closed entity should finally be purchased or taken over. And if that doesn't happen, then assets of the company, assets of the nation go waste, they rot, businesses get closed, jobs are lost, and that is a national waste. And that's what we are witnessing in the country today. Companies are available for a song and there are no takers, and that's become a routine affair. What we are now witnessing is that many a time companies with assets are put on sale by banks or by creditors or by the NCLT, but there are no takers or buyers for it. Take the recent case of HDIL. HDIL has been on sale, but there are no buyers for it. At one point of time, it used to be among India's top 3 real estate companies. It is now on the block and there are no takers or buyers for it. Initially, Adani Realty, Suntech Realty, Dilip Sanghvi's ARC did show interest, but all of them backed out. There was just interest shown, some expression of interest came, but when it came to a time of bidding, nobody ever put in a bid. HDIL has got giant assets. It has a huge land bank. It has prime development rights to properties in Mumbai. But while it has huge assets, it also has huge frauds and huge liquidation. And that explains why buyers are not willing to come forth. All its assets are mired in liquidation and titles are not clear. And therefore, even if it is available for a song, what we are witnessing is that buyers just back off. Its assets have been seized by various investigation agencies. Its assets are not really free in the sense they ought to be for a buyer. And therefore, why should any buyer put in money even though the assets may be available for a cheap price? That's what's happened even in the case of DHFL. DHFL is a sister entity of HDIL. Between DHFL, HDIL and PMC Bank, there has been a fraud of a range of 1.5 lakh crores combined. That's the kind of estimate that we would put it. And DHFL, as we said, used to be the 3rd largest housing finance company of India. Even DHFL is on sale. Initial expression of interest came from Blackstone, they came from Hero Finance, they came from Adani's, they came from KKR and a few others. But none of the expression of interest got converted into a tangible bid. And that's because DHFL may have had big business, it may be a big company, but it is also a giant fraud. It is loaded with crimes, it is loaded with financial crimes, and thus no buyers, no takers for it. This kind of a scene, the case of HDIL or DHFL not having buyers, has been happening too often in India. Take the case of Jet Airways. State Bank of India had very confidently said that by May 2019, it will get a buyer for Jet Airways. We are now in August 2020 and Jet Airways has got no buyer. Jet Airways is certainly headed to liquidation. And that's because it may have been India's biggest airline, but it is also loaded with big frauds, big siphonings, big offenses and violations of law. We saw that happening with Arcom also. Arcom did have bidders in the beginning. Its own, we would call sister concern, which is RGO, was a buyer of Arcom, but it backed out at the last moment. There were too many litigations in it, which even discouraged RGU from getting into it. Take the case of Yes Bank. Yes Bank was desperately trying to rope in a foreign bidder or yet another investor in the bank, and nobody came in. Finally, State Bank of India, at the bidding of the government, had to step in and invest in the bank. We saw that happening in the case of ILFS. We saw that happening in the case of DHFL, HDIL, PMC Bank, all on the block. All cases where authorities are looking out for buyers. Reserve Bank is desperate that a buyer or a bigger entity takes over the PMC Bank. Nobody coming forward. We saw Amtech Auto getting liquidated because no buyer came. That happened with Bharti Shipyard. That happened with ABG Shipyard. All these were entities which were available, which could have been bought very cheaply and which had assets, which had businesses. But what we are witnessing is that all of them finally rot, all of them get wasted, go into liquidation. The question is, why does this happen in India? Why does it happen that you may have entities and assets available at a juicy price, but nobody is willing, nobody is daring to step in and take them over? There are many reasons for that. Let's discuss them. The first reason, how do you start the takeover process of an entity whose financial statements have been known to be bogus, incomplete, unreliable, and completely contrary to the facts of the case? All these entities, whether it is Yes Bank, whether it is Jet Airways, whether it is DHFL, HDIL, PMC Bank, etc., all of them have had financial statements which were certainly fraudulent and bogus. Any buyer is going to be extremely wary of stepping into such a situation. Even the data room, even the records of all these entities have not given comfort to the buyers and their consultants when they went for a due diligence to assess the real state of affairs. And at the very inception there, progress in trying to take over such entities was thwarted. Further, all these companies have witnessed siphoning of assets. Company assets have been transferred in fraudulent names, in benami names, in bogus names. They actually belong to the company. How do you prepare a bid for a company without knowing actually the existence of the assets and what are they all about? You need comfort, you need clarity, and without that, again, the takeover process stops. All these entities which don't get taken over, take the case of Jet Airways or Arcom in particular, they all have had assets which have been uncertain and liabilities which have been certain and also hidden. They are loaded with situations where assets are missing or assets are not known, but there are liabilities hanging over, there are liabilities which are hidden, there are liabilities which are there to bite the promoter when he steps in as a buyer of the entity. They also have potential litigation by way of prosecution under various laws that got violated, and that completely hinders the process of a takeover. With this kind of a background, how do you value an entity being taken over? The bankers and the creditors expect a top price, but when the buyer does a due diligence, he has a problem putting a value to the asset or to the entity concerned. For the simple reason, he is going to factor in all the contingencies that will surface after he has taken over the company or the assets, and to that extent, the valuation is bound to be discounted. These kind of fraudulent entities, these kind of entities where promoters have violated all kinds of laws, can be taken over only when a buyer gets a juicy deal, a very attractive proposition for takeover. And what we have witnessed is that buyers have not been getting deals where they feel satisfied that they took the risk of taking over a tainted, fraudulent entity. Yet another interesting factor that we are witnessing in India is that all these companies we spoke about may be bankrupt or may be poor, but their promoters remain rich. And that's because the promoters have siphoned away thousands of crores from these companies. They are loaded with money. They are men of deep pockets still, even if their companies may have gone bankrupt. And that has triggered them to engage in unending litigation to prevent takeover of their companies. We saw that happening in SR Steel in particular. The Euroyas, who have been the original promoters of SR Steel, engaged the takeover into all kinds of litigations, right from the NCLT to the Supreme Court to the Bombay High Court to the NCLT, etc. And they tried their best that the takeover should not happen. These men need to be questioned. If your company has gone so poor and bankrupt, how are you so rich that you can afford unending litigation? Again, it is because of this litigation that takeovers have been slow in India. And since these erstwhile promoters of these fraudulent bogus entities continue to be men of deep pockets, they have also been trying to put up fronts in order to take over their own companies through a backdoor entry, completely contrary to the law of the land. We have seen Naresh Goyal attempt that in Jet Airways. We have seen the Ruia brothers do that in the case of SR Steel. And even Rana Kapoor did that in the case of Yes Bank. They all tried to put up fronts of all kinds of dubious, questionable characters in order to take over their own entities at a huge discount. And in the process, defraud the lenders, defraud the bankers, defraud the creditors. That's been another reason why takeovers of entities have not been happening in India. The system continues to collude with these dubious promoters, and that's because the system has been engaged, involved with them in all the crimes they did, and it is in the interest of the system itself that takeovers do not happen, because otherwise all those bankers, babus and netas who are involved in those crimes, they also get exposed. That's another reason why these takeovers that we thought should happen in a large scale have not been happening in India. What is the larger picture that emerges here? The larger picture that emerges here is that the potential threat of prosecution, the potential threat of penalty and unending litigation has been preventing deserving promoters from taking over companies, and because of that, national assets are going waste. Unless promoters do not get some kind of an immunity, they are not willing to step in. They need immunity from the past liabilities. They need immunity from the past crimes. They need immunity from penalties because of past deeds of those dubious fraudulent promoters. And when that immunity comes, we have seen takeovers do take place. That happened in the case of JSW. It sought immunity from all the past misdeeds of the singles in the case of Bhushan Power, and that was granted to them by the IBC being amended. Unless this kind of immunity doesn't come, we are not going to witness large-scale takeovers, and in our opinion, it is the need of the hour. With NPAs being so huge, there are giant assets in the country which are rotting, and if they continue to rot because takeovers do not take place, that's a loss to the nation, that's a loss to the economy, and that needs to be prevented. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, well, subscribe to our YouTube channel.